Christmas Eve, 1887. Snow fell heavy on the Wyoming territory, each flake a silent witness to Samuel Thorne's solitude. The silence in his cabin was a physical presence, thick and suffocating, broken only by the crackle of the hearth and the whisper of the wind against the logs. He stood at the frost-covered window, his reflection a ghostly image superimposed over the vast, white emptiness outside. His 6-year-old daughter, Hannah, sat at the rough-hewn table, her small hands carefully arranging a collection of pine cones into a miniature forest. She was humming a carol, the same one her mother used to sing while baking, and the sound was a sharp, sweet ache in Samuel's chest. 2 years. 2 years since the fever had stolen Sarah from their lives, leaving a void that Samuel had tried to fill with relentless work. He'd poured his grief into mending fences, breaking horses, and wresting a living from the unforgiving land. He'd poured all his love into Hannah. The rest of the world, with its pitying glances and well-meaning but useless advice, could stay beyond his fence line. "Papa, do you think she'll come today?" Hannah's voice, clear as a winter stream, broke through his thoughts. Samuel's jaw, perpetually tight, clenched even harder. The mail-order bride. He had penned the advertisement 3 months ago in a moment of stark, practical desperation. It wasn't hope that had moved his hand, but duty. Hannah needed a woman's influence, a softer touch in her life than his own calloused hands could provide. He needed help with the homestead, a partner to share the crushing burden of survival. Love had no place in the equation, his heart was a barren field where nothing could grow. The stage was due at noon, he said, his voice flat, trying to manage her expectations. If she's coming, she'll be here. Hannah, however, was fueled by a child's boundless optimism. She bounced on her heels, her bright eyes wide with anticipation. "I hope she's kind and pretty and likes Christmas. I hope she tells stories and knows how to make gingerbread." Samuel said nothing. He hoped she was practical and sturdy, a woman who understood hardship and wouldn't expect flowery words or affections he could no longer give. A knock shattered the silence. It was sharp and sudden against the howl of the wind. Hannah gasped, her pine cone forest forgotten. "She's here." Samuel's boots felt leaden as he crossed the worn floorboards. His hand, scarred and powerful from years of labor, paused on the cold iron of the door latch. He took one deep, steadying breath, steeling himself for the stranger on the other side. Then he opened the door. A woman stood in the swirling snow. The sight of her was a profound shock, far beyond anything his pragmatic mind had prepared him for. She was wearing a cheongsam, a dress of a style he had only ever seen in illustrations of the Orient. The silk was a faded blue, its once vibrant color worn to a whisper by time and hardship. The high, stiff collar was frayed at the edges, and the delicate embroidery of blossoms that trailed down the front was broken and threadbare in places. A crude patch of rough, dark wool had been sewn over a tear near the hem, a jarring testament to her poverty against the ghost of the garment's former elegance. The thin silk offered no real defense against the Wyoming wind, and she shivered, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. In one hand, she clutched the handle of a small, battered suitcase, made of what looked like cheap cardboard and held together with a length of frayed rope. Her face was pale and drawn from the journey, but her eyes, dark, intelligent, and steady, held no trace of shame or supplication. She stood amidst the snow and wind, a fragile, exotic flower impossibly transplanted into the harshest of winters. Samuel's stomach plummeted. This was not just poverty, this was a level of foreignness, of utter displacement, that he was entirely unprepared for. She spoke his name, her voice low but clear, a strange combination of a question and a prayer. "Mr. Thorne?" "I am Leanne." Before he could form a response, Hannah pushed past his legs, her small face alight with an unadulterated sunrise of welcome. "Papa, she's cold. Let her in." Samuel remained frozen, staring at Leanne, at the strange cut of her dress, at the way the snow clung to the faded silk. His first instinct was a gut punch of fear, and not cruelty. What had he done? What desperate circumstances had propelled this woman from a world of silk and blossoms to his remote doorstep? This was a level of need he hadn't anticipated, a vulnerability that felt dangerous to the fragile peace of his ordered grief. But Hannah was already reaching for the stranger's hand, her small, warm fingers closing around Leanne's icy ones. Samuel found he could not move to stop her. The winter wind howled between them, sweeping a flurry of snowflakes across the threshold like scattered, broken promises. Leanne stepped inside, and the snowflakes on her shoulders began to melt like tears. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that seemed to emanate from a place deep within her, a place untouched by her circumstances. Hannah tugged insistently at her father's sleeve. "Papa, she's frozen solid. She needs warm coffee." "Hannah," Samuel began, his voice rough, but his daughter was already leading Leanne toward the warmth of the fire. "Sit here, Miss Leanne. This is the warmest spot. Papa built this fireplace himself. He's very good at building things." Leanne allowed the child to guide her into the worn armchair. For a fleeting moment, her carefully constructed composure flickered. A wave of bone-deep exhaustion and overwhelming relief washed over her features before she mastered it again. "Thank you, child," she said, her voice gentler and more refined than Samuel had expected. Hannah bustled into the small kitchen area and returned with a steaming mug of coffee. Samuel recognized it immediately. It was Sarah's cup, the one with the hairline crack and the chipped handle that she'd refused to throw away. His daughter handed it to Leanne with a grave sense of ceremony. "This was Mama's favorite cup," Hannah explained, her voice confidential. "She said it had character." Leanne's hands, chapped and red from the cold, shook slightly as she accepted the offering. "Then I am honored to use it." She brought the mug to her lips, and as she drank, a faint blush of color began to return to her cheeks. Samuel watched from the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest, a silent, grim sentinel. He should be asking questions, demanding explanations. Instead, he found himself studying the details, the foreign cut of her dress, the ghosts of embroidered blossoms, the unwavering steadiness in her eyes when she looked up and found him watching. "Mr. Thorne," she said quietly, acknowledging his scrutiny. "I know this is not what you expected." "No," he agreed, the word coming out as hard as a stone. "It isn't." She didn't flinch from his coldness. "I can explain my circumstances, if you will allow it." Before he could respond, Hannah, oblivious to the adult tension, piped up. "Miss Leanne, can you help me hang my stocking? Mama always helped me." "Of course, little one," Leanne said, her attention shifting completely to the child, her face softening. Samuel watched as she rose and followed Hannah to the stone fireplace. He saw the patient way she held the chair steady as Hannah stood on tiptoe to reach the nail, the gentle guidance of her hands. When the small, knitted stocking was hung, Hannah stepped back to admire their work, then looked up at Leanne with the devastating honesty of a child. "Miss Leanne," she said in a conspiratorial whisper, "Papa doesn't smile anymore. Not since Mama went to heaven. He used to smile all the time." Samuel's chest tightened as if bound by iron bands. He should intervene, spare this stranger his family's open wounds. But his feet were rooted to the floor. Leanne knelt, the faded blue silk of her dress pooling on the rough floorboards. She brought herself down to Hannah's height and took the child's small hands in her own. "Grief is love with nowhere to go, little one," she said, her voice a soft balm. "Your papa's heart is full of love for your mama, and for you. Sometimes, when we lose someone so precious, we forget how to show it. But it is there. I can see it in the way he builds a strong fire to keep you warm." Hannah considered this with a solemn frown. "Do you think he'll remember how to smile again?" "I think," Leanne said, her voice barely a whisper, "that little girls who are brave and kind to strangers often help their papas remember the most important things." Samuel turned away, a muscle working in his jaw. He busied himself with supper preparations, the familiar, mechanical tasks a shield against the emotions churning within him. He served the simple meal of stew and bread in near silence. Afterward, Leanne quietly insisted on washing the dishes. Samuel didn't argue. He took Hannah to her small room, listened to her prayers, which now included a heartfelt request for Miss Leanne to be happy in her new home, and kissed her forehead. When he returned to the main room, he found Leanne by the fire, her needle moving with practiced grace. She was mending the tear in Hannah's stocking that she must have smagged that morning. "I hope you don't mind," she said, looking up from her work. "I noticed the tear." "Fine," he said shortly. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat in the chair opposite her. The silence stretched, filled only by the hiss of the fire and the whisper of her thread through the wool. Finally, he spoke, the question tearing from him. "How did you come to answer my advertisement in such poverty?" She finished the stitch and set the stocking aside, her hands folding calmly in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was steady and devoid of self-pity. "My father was a respected merchant in our village in Guangdong. I was educated, taught to read and write English by a missionary. He believed a woman's mind was as valuable as her dowry." A sad, fleeting smile touched her lips. "When he died last spring, I discovered his generosity had outstripped his business sense. He had left nothing but debts." She glanced down at the faded silk of her dress. "This was my mother's. It is all I have left of her, of that life. I sold everything else, the house, the shop, my mother's jewelry, to pay what he owed and preserve his honor in the community. I was left with nothing. In my home, a woman alone, with no family and no prospects, has a very difficult path. I saw your advertisement in a San Francisco paper that had made its way to our village. A widower with a child, seeking a partner for a frontier life." She finally turned her gaze back to him, and her eyes were direct and clear. "I could have sold this dress for a simple calico one, Mr. Thorne. I could have fabricated a story of modest wealth to make myself a more appealing bride. But I will not build a life on a foundation of deception. You deserve to know exactly who and what was standing before you, or a woman who lost everything material but refused to lose her honor." Samuel sat back, the force of her words striking him silent. She had chosen honesty over advantage, dignity over desperation. His Sarah had possessed that same fierce, unyielding integrity. He saw past the foreign dress and the worn-out shoes to the core of the woman before him. He saw strength. "That took courage," he said finally, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "More than most men I know." A flicker of warmth, of relief, softened her expression. "Thank you for saying so." He stood abruptly, his mind a maelstrom. He saw it all with sudden, stark clarity, the quiet dignity of this woman, the immediate love in his daughter's eyes, the brutal judgment that awaited them in town. He saw the whispers, the pity, the condescension. They wouldn't just see poverty, they would see a foreigner, an oddity. They would try to define her by the strange, faded silk she wore. In that moment, a decision crystallized, as hard and clear as the winter ice outside. He would not allow it. "Wait here," he commanded, his voice firm. He grabbed his coat from its peg and left the cabin without another word, stepping into the cold fury of the Christmas Eve night. The ride to town was a battle against the elements and his own lingering doubts. The wind tore at him, and the snow stung his face, but a fire of purpose burned within him. He found Reverend Michael at the small church, lighting candles for the midnight service. Samuel, dispensing with pleasantries, explained the situation with a raw directness that left no room for argument. A woman of great honor had arrived, his intended bride, and he would not have her spend a single night under his roof without the full protection and dignity of his name. He wanted to be married. Tonight. The Reverend, a kind man who had known Samuel his entire life, saw the unshakable conviction in his eyes and agreed to come to the homestead after the service. On his way out of town, his path was blocked by the formidable Mrs. Albright, the town's self-appointed moral compass, and her circle of gossips. "Samuel Thorne," she cooed, her smile as sharp as an icicle. "Word travels fast. Is it true your mail-order bride arrived? And in? Well, in rather exotic attire, I hear. Her name is Leanne, and her circumstances were modest," Samuel said, his hands tightening on the reins, his voice dangerously calm. Mrs. Albright clucked her tongue, a sound of theatrical pity. "Such a shame. A man of your standing. And a foreigner? In that costume? What will people think, Samuel? It's practically charity, what you've done, taking in such a creature." Samuel's jaw tightened, but his voice, when he spoke, was clear and loud, carrying in the cold night air for all to hear. I've just come from asking Reverend Michael to perform our wedding ceremony tonight. At my home. The collective, shocked gasp went through the small group. You are correct, Mrs. Albright. Her circumstances are modest, he continued, his gaze locking onto hers. She came to me with nothing but her character, and I have found it worth more than any fortune this town has to offer. That is the woman I will be proud to call my wife before God and any man who cares to witness it. He spurred his horse, leaving them standing in the snow, their mouths agape. The ride home was different. He had not only made a decision, he had defended it. He had defended her. When he burst back into the cabin, shaking the snow from his coat, Leanne was sitting exactly where he had left her, her hands folded in her lap, waiting. She looked up as he entered, her expression wary, guarded. Reverend Michael will be here after his service, Samuel announced, his voice ringing with a certainty that surprised even himself. He has agreed to marry us. Leanne's carefully maintained composure finally shattered. Tears welled in her dark eyes and spilled down her pale cheeks. Mr. Thorne. Samuel. You do not have to do this. This is too much, too fast. It is an act of pity. He crossed the room in 2 long strides and knelt before her, taking her cold, trembling hands in his. I am not doing this out of pity, Leanne. I am doing this because my daughter, in her boundless wisdom, saw you more clearly in 5 minutes than I did in an hour. I am doing this because you chose honor when it would have been infinitely easier to choose deceit. My wife, Sarah, believed that character was the only true measure of a person. I nearly forgot that lesson. He paused, his grip on her hands tightening. Thank you for reminding me. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn, velvet box. This was my wife's mother's ring. Sarah left it for me, for the next woman worthy of my heart. He opened it, revealing a simple, unadorned gold band. I choose you, Leanne. Not despite your circumstances, but because of the woman you are within them. Will you be my wife? Will you and Hannah be my family? Through her tears, a radiant, tremulous smile broke through. Yes, she whispered, the word full of a hope she hadn't dared to feel. Yes, Samuel, I will. A few hours later, with the wind whispering its secrets outside and the fire crackling a steady rhythm within, Reverend Michael stood before the hearth. Hannah, awakened for the momentous occasion, stood sleepily but proudly between Samuel and Leanne, her small hands holding both of theirs. The image was a striking tapestry of worlds colliding, the rugged American rancher, the innocent child in her flannel nightgown, and the bride in her faded blue cheongsam.